Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, August 13th, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about the Virginia governor's race and a massive police group in the state of Virginia endorsing the Democrat, Abigail Spanberger, in this November's governor's race in this battleground state. Now, this is a pretty major endorsement for Abigail Spanberger, a police group that has split their endorsement for the first time in a very long time. They haven't endorsed a Democrat since the 2009 election. This police group, the Virginia Police Benevolent Association, endorsed Glenn Youngkin, the Republican, 4 years ago, and every other Republican prior to that. And looking at this endorsement, they've endorsed the Republican candidate for lieutenant governor, the Republican candidate for attorney general, but on the governor's level is endorsing Abigail Spanberger. Now, the reason why this is so noteworthy, and we rarely do cover endorsements, even when it comes down to major unions and major groups across this country, we don't talk about them super in depth, because for a variety of different reasons, endorsements have started to carry a lot less weight. And while I don't think that Youngkin, won his race in 2021 because of this endorsement, nor do I think that Spanberger will win her race simply because of this endorsement. I don't think endorsements are really the way that people go besides in primaries and races with very high-profile political entities. When you're looking at this, what I think is that we are seeing traditionally conservative and Republican-leaning groups reading the writing on the wall. Now, this police group endorsing Spanberger, again, stands in direct contrast with some of their moves that they've made in the past. In 2021, they announced that they were endorsing Glenn Youngkin for governor. Now, this really didn't surprise many people. This is, again, a group that has historically been very pro-Republican and has voted that way for a long, long time. I mean, the last time that they endorsed a Democrat for governor was 1 year after Obama, and that Democrat ended up losing. But either way, this endorsement for Glenn Youngkin, noteworthy, and also shows you the track record of this group. But it isn't just Glenn Youngkin that they endorsed. Even in 2017, when there was a very clear indication that Ed Gillespie was going to lose the governor's race in the state of Virginia, the Virginia Police Association endorsed him too. In 2013, when Ken Cuccinelli ran across the state of Virginia, decided that he wanted to be governor, he lost his race, but of course was endorsed by the Virginia Police Benevolent Association. These were pretty big endorsements, and again, aren't the reasons why candidates win or lose races, but show that this organization has historically been very, very conservative and very pro-Republican. And again, that makes sense, especially given the way that, typically speaking, you find that law enforcement members vote in presidential elections, in local elections. More often than not, you're going to find a Republican rather than a Democrat. But that doesn't seem to be the big reason why we're seeing Spanberger receive this endorsement. It very much seems like this association likes a lot of the policies from Spanberger, but also is treating it from a sense of political calculus. It has been clear for months on end that the Virginia governor's race is not one that will be competitive this November. For a while, it might have seemed like it might be more competitive. But all of the data points that have been released since then, 2024, have shown that post Donald Trump winning the election, the odds of victory for Spanberger have skyrocketed to nearly 95%. And it isn't just me saying that. I'm not just pulling numbers and making statistics up. When you actually take a look at the odds and people who have spent their time calculating forecasts in Virginia, she has a 97% chance at winning. And as much as Winsome Sears would like to be in a position where she can win in this state, it just simply isn't happening. And it looks like this police group knows that too. And I think also too, when you're looking at it from a sense of political calculus, it isn't just that you know someone's going to win and so you don't want to endorse their opponent. Actively endorsing the candidate you believe is going to win indicates that you want to work with this candidate at some point in the future, especially as bold of a move as doing a split ticket. This way, depending on who wins, you're in the good graces of the Republican Attorney General, the Republican Lieutenant Governor, and what you expect to be the Democratic Governor, meaning that you have now endorsed both sides, and in the case that either prevails, you have that to rely on. But this is the real endorsement that makes the most noise, the one that has written headlines in the Washington Post, whereas before you had to get campaign websites to write op-eds about it and the Virginia, Association itself to actually release it on their website. Now you're hitting mainstream Washington Post. Why? Because it's a very unconventional move, especially in this day and age of Donald Trump's second administration. The Republican Party has really tried to hone in on this idea about being tough on crime. They've just now federalized the DC law enforcement. These are all things that really feed into the narrative about Republicans being tough on crime, getting crime out of the streets, whatever it might be, believe it or not, and whether or not their tactics work or not, because there's a whole separate conversation that is needed to be had about that. The point is perception and how this perception impacts races across the country. And what we're seeing is that in Virginia, it is Spanberger who has relentlessly been campaigning in this state and has come out on top in every single way. Fundraising, polling data, predictions, endorsements, now in terms of bringing over traditionally conservative-leaning groups. I mean, it is really, really showing the extent of her political abilities in this state. And we're seeing it in full force. Now, I will reiterate, because if you've skipped ahead in the video and you didn't hear me say it before, but I think it needs to be said, this endorsement is not going to be the reason Spanberger wins. She was already going to win, and now they're jumping off to the, on the winning racehorse. Because you do that in politics. I think this is also something, too, that, not to really comment on the last presidential election, because we talked about it really beating that horse, but of course, extremely relevant. We can talk about it at any point. The point is that Kamala Harris didn't receive so many major endorsements. Notably, major unions, the Teamsters in particular, did not endorse Kamala Harris in the election. And whether or not you can have conversations about, Democrats having bailed out their pensions and all of these different things that Democrats did do tangibly in Biden's administration for unions and the Teamsters in specific, that doesn't seem to be the exact political calculus that O'Brien was going for when they were talking about endorsements. And even since then, I think the Teamsters have found themselves more at home on social issues, especially of their union members with the Republican Party. But when it comes down, just strictly speaking, to the 24 election, there was wide expectation on both sides that their respective party candidates would win. And when O'Brien spoke at the RNC, but seeked a speaking slot at the DNC, it's exactly what I was trying to point out in the beginning when people do these split ticket endorsements. But again, I think this is more about who they think is going to win rather than hedging your bets on either side winning, which is what I think sometimes we see with endorsements. But unlike the 2020 election, where it was pretty clear that Biden would have won that race and was going to win that race, 2024 was way more of a toss-up, which is why it is noteworthy. I mean, this is the equivalent of a major union, AFL-CIO, that has historically backed the Democratic Party very obviously because Republicans and Democrats have such different stances on being pro-union or not. Democrats arguably being more pro-union. Looking at the 2025 race, you're finding that this police group that has often found itself more at home historically with Republican after Republican after Republican is now choosing a Democrat. I don't believe that it's because they think just plainly that Spanberger has better policies. That might be part of it. But they know their base. They know their group leans conservative. But it is about who you want to work with in the state house and in the governor's mansion the next election. It's about who you want to work with in the next session, that you have a candidate who is an extremely clear frontrunner, who is on track for a dominating victory in this state. And you don't get in the way of that. You don't go up against someone who has a 97% chance at winning. And the thing was that when they made these endorsements in 2013, in 2017, in 2021, they were actually closer races. In 2013, there actually was expectation that McAuliffe would lose the race. Obviously, he did not, but a lot of people blame the Libertarian candidate and said, you pulled votes away from the GOP, and we should blame you. So then, 4 years later, Ralph Northam was in a position where, sure, he was winning, but it wasn't exactly what people thought it would be. The margins in the polls were closer, the predictions were a little bit more off, and by the time you reached Election Day, Northam was up on average by 3.3%. Obviously, the result ended up with about an 8-point victory, but it was expected to be much closer. In 2021, endorsements like these mattered a little bit more because it was also a very close race. By the time you reached the end election, Youngkin was expected to win by 1.5 points, and so he did win by about 2 points in Virginia. The point I'm making, historically closer races or historically an expectation of closer races. That's not what's happening in 2025. Spanberger has ran a strong campaign, and Winsome Sears has not. And even the more Republican groups are seeing it clear as day that come January, there will be an inauguration. And it won't be Winsome Sears, who they endorsed 4 years ago. I should have mentioned they endorsed 4 years ago, are rescinding their backing of her and backing the Democrat for governor because there is no other clear victor. And that shows just to the extent that Democrats have this grip on the Virginia elections this November. Now, does this mean Democrats will trounce Republicans everywhere and that all of a sudden all these groups will abandon historically, going for Republican candidates? No. But in Virginia in particular, this has been a fascinating race to watch because Democrats have gone from being in a position where it's competitive to now being the near total and absolute favorites in the race. And that is the state of where we are. And that is why this police group, the Virginia Police Benevolent Association, has endorsed Abigail Spanberger being the first Democrat that they've endorsed since the 2009 election. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2025 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.